Well, Patrick, thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for having me along here. I'm really, really honoured. I do just want to check, Patrick, because your signal was slightly breaking up, that people can hear me all right, that it's not my broadband. As chairman of AIR, I always worry if the broadband goes off, but maybe yes. Michelle or somebody can just confirm.
David, just to say, I can hear you, and Pat is back on screen for me. Thanks very much. Isn't it always the way when you least expect it, it throws it up? But it's lovely to see everybody's calm nature, and we'll continue on.
Great. So, Patrick, in relation to your question, look, Unplust is the first time I've worked in the public sector. I'd always worked in the private sector, mainly with private equity companies, PLCs, worked in the UK and the US. And, you know, when the opportunity came up, it really fascinated me, because most of my career, where I've enjoyed it most has been really on the cusp of private and public, where business meets public policy, let's say, or where business meets politics, whether that be in media or whatever, or telecoms. You know, telecoms really interesting. So if you look at AIR at the moment, completely privately owned company by private equity, but nobody could claim it's a private company. It has a public service. It has a public meaning. So it's a fascinating place to be. I mean, I guess, you know, since I'm speaking to a world-class business school audience, you know, I think I'd start with the cost of capital. And the thing around Unplust is, as been publicly owned, the cost of capital is pretty much zero. And the requirement is to be financially sustainable, but that just requires us to make a sufficient return to be able to invest in the business. And we look at that as being about somewhere around a 7% return. So, you know, being aware of that, you then have to match that with something else. And the other thing is, so that's our financial stability, but why are we here? What's our purpose? And purpose is so much at the heart of what we do. And, you know, a couple of years ago, you know, a year or two into the transformation program, we worked really hard to define what our purpose is. And, you know, purpose is something that's deep in the heart's core. Our front lines, our postmen and postwomen, our post offices, you know, these are people who have given their lives to public service. And you find out soon enough what it means. And our job then as a leader of the organization, or as leaders, is sometimes just to codify and articulate what's there. So our purpose we defined as to act for the common good. And then we extended that to act for the common good now, because there's no point waiting, now and for generations to come. And the hint in there is, of course, for sustainability. So I think once we're clear about our purpose and we're clear about the financial return, it becomes relatively straightforward in terms of what we're trying to do. You know, the transformation itself is a piece that begins with trying to find out, just make sure we secured where we were economically, and we put up our prices very sharply. We put up the price of a stamp by 36%, and probably the biggest increase in a single day of any utility ever in the history of the state. But I knew that you know, postage is not a major cost for a business or even for a person. But actually having a really good postal system really matters, and boy, have we learned that in lockdown. So saving the postal system, and if we could express that to people, people would accept it. And thank goodness the citizens of Ireland who own Unplust, they accepted this and said, yeah, we'll go with that. And I said the quid pro quo was, well, we'll use that time, that couple of years space that gives us, to design our strategy. And we worked with McKinsey and various other people and developed our strategy. In fact, the strategy was led by a Smurfit alumnus or alumna, Aoife Byrne, and I appointed her as chief of staff. She was the first female executive appointed to a role in Unplust, to the top team, and she led that strategy work with McKinsey. So we then designed the strategy and put it in place. But But fundamental is the question you have, which is make sure as an absolute basic that the financial performance is clear and sorted. And that actually is the easier piece to do. And then focus on the leadership piece, which is what is our purpose and how do we drive forward. So I think one of the things was actually thinking around some of the principles of transformation. I mean, there's some of the things are very straightforward, and they're, you know, all of you will know as well or better than me what that is. And, you know, having great people, having a fantastic team. And, you know, we largely appointed a new team, not that people in the previous team weren't good. They were all great people, but they'd been there a while and people wanted to move on and do different things. So appoint a team that has the drive and the energy, and above all has the commitment to the organization and to bring it forward. And those things are straightforward. You know all of that. The strategy itself, you know, you can work out what it is, and it's about how do you move from an old world to a new world. To me, there's a couple of principles behind it that really, really matter. The first one, I think, is a McKinsey one, which they call big moves. I mean, I talked about that price increase. You know, putting the price up a little would not have done enough. And sometimes making a big move is easier than making a small move, and it has a transformational effect. I'll show you a very simple one, and it's not so much that this was driving the transformation, but it was part of something else around our future around sustainability. Is we needed, as we were moving from essentially being a letters business to being an e-commerce parcels business, we needed to get postmen and women off bicycles and into vans, because you can't deliver parcels on bicycles. So an order came in for 700 vans to put on the streets of Dublin, in addition to our fleet, and we've the largest fleet in Ireland, by 2,500 vehicles. But in Dublin, let's get an extra 700 diesel vehicles. I'm going, you gotta be kidding. We're not putting 700 diesel chuggers onto the streets of Dublin. So I said, let's get electric vehicles. So in a very proper way, and sometimes this is a kind of civil service mentality, really good people on bus went away, came back, very cautious, very careful, and said, okay, we've ordered 10 electric vehicles and 690 diesel. I'm going, why? You know, do the vehicles work, the electric vehicles? Oh, yes. Are they being used elsewhere? Yes. I'm going, well, we don't need to test them. Just get 700 electric vehicles. It's a very simple example, which I like telling, which shows the difference between making a move and making a big move. And so big moves has become part of the language in Unpust. And we use it to define what we do. So what were the big moves? The big moves were to split the business, realize into two. We've two core businesses: a delivery business, which is the postman and postwomen, and that was all about transitioning from a world of letters into a world of e-commerce and parcels. And because of the pandemic, that has now been accelerated such that the parcel volumes are probably 3 years ahead of where we expect them to be. And the other business, our post office business, which was all about moving away from social welfare into being a business that's much more about financial services, digital, omni-channel, and that. But in both cases, you come back to the purpose and saying, but we'll never forget why we're here. We're here to act for the common good. So that implies making sure that we keep post offices open. Yes, we had to consolidate the network to make sure we hit that financial stability of that 7% return, but don't go further, even though financially we'd be better off going further, but then we'd miss our purpose about acting for the common good. And so we define where we need to be. And one of the big arguments we had in those days, about 4 years ago, is what's a village? What's a town in Ireland? Because we said we should be in every town or village. It's one of these extraordinary things that there is no answer. We have a Department of Rural Affairs that refuses to define what a town or a village is. So we came up with our own definition. and said it's where 500 people are. That's a conurbation. And everywhere where there's 500 people will have a post office. And that's how we distributed our network. So you do things like that. You work things out, always balancing, make sure that we're financially stable, but make sure we're adding for communities. I might just, Patrick, say one other thing when I said that, one of the principles is big moves. I think another principle, which for me, and this is very much around being a CEO, and for all of you who are CEOs or leaders in your organization, either now or going to be, is the whole notion of what my job is. And I remember, and I do it sometimes where if I'm speaking class, I draw a circle and say, where does the CEO sit? And people say, well, in the center of the circle, and and you see everything, do everything. And it's not true. Actually, the role of a CEO is to be in the edge of the circle, because it's about looking out into the world. And I love that Jack Welch quote that if the outside world is changing faster than the world inside your company, you're becoming irrelevant. So for me, my role isn't to drive everything in Unpost. I have a brilliant management team, 2 fantastic chief operating officers, and they run each of the 2 businesses. Debbie Byrne and Gareth Bridgman, they're fantastic people. They run the business, and Peter Quinn, our CFO. So that happens. My job is to constantly be the person who says, what's happening in the world is this? Do you know what trend is happening? You know what we're missing? And that's a really important part. So to me, that's a key piece as well.
Thanks. Hopefully I'm back on. Thanks, David. You've had a wide variety of executive positions ranging from retail to media and telecommunications. What are some of the key leadership lessons that you've drawn from these experiences?
Well, certainly that one I would say, which is about constantly, it has to be like a paranoia about what's going on in the world, because there's the funny thing is every industry I've been in is the worst industry, just the worst. It's the worst time and the worst industry, and they're all collapsing. So I went into television. Oh, it's all over television, and everybody in the television industry is saying it's so hard for us. It's all over. There's all these multiple channels coming in, and now people are looking online, and everything's gone online and can't see it. I went in at Postal, and people said, "Oh, Postal is over. It's a really tough industry." I remember me at the time, and she said to me, a Canadian woman, very smart one, but she said, "Oh, it's drudgery, David. Letters, emails taking over. It's not going to happen." And every industry, I can guarantee you, thinks they're the worst industry, or it's the toughest industry, or everybody else has an easier time. There's no room for whinging. There's no room for moaning. Get out there and find the future. So that whole thing about that paranoia about what's going on in the world, find the future. We found the future in TV3 as it was, which was to build our own studios, create some programming, control our own destiny more. In Unpost, it's about e-commerce, it's about financial services. Whatever industry it is, find your future. I mean, I think that's a key piece. Maybe something else, that I learned. I've described that issue about big moves, but you've got to find the people around you who are really, and it's a word I use more and more now, are uncynical. And there is no room for cynicism in business, at least not in a business I'm in. Cynicism is so destructive of organizations. And I've been in teams where all the energy, as my friend Caroline Lennon, who runs AIR, she does this description about, is the energy in the room towards the customer and towards the conversation, is the energy of the conversation towards solving problems. If it's not that, then it's just cynical, and you have to get away from that. So I think that's an absolutely vital lesson. So inevitably, as always we do, you come back to the quality of people. But understanding the outside world, I think, is most important. I certainly spend the first hour, I tend to get up fairly early, so that I get a couple of hours on my own every day, to just simply read newspapers, look at social media, find out, see what's happening, and be really conscious of them. You know, a lot of this came in Unpost came to life when, not so much came to life, but really came to matter, as so much has mattered with COVID. And it mattered in this way, in that, you know, you're faced a situation where your whole world, like everybody, is turned upside down, and COVID has this unique ability to be completely global and yet feel completely local, to be completely social, and yet it's very individual and personal. And how do you manage through that? So the work we did on purpose, on understanding what our purpose is, became absolutely paramount. We had built up, because of the turnaround in Unpost, because of that transformation into e-commerce, transformation into financial services. Financially, we did very well over the past 3 years. So we had a strong enough balance sheet, and we calculated, I remember pretty much this day last year when lockdown was beginning, I immediately did work with our CFO, with Peter Quinn, and we worked out, we think this pandemic will cost us 50 million euros. And actually, by the end of December, we worked out it cost us pretty much exactly 50 million euros. And so that means, you know, it cost us all of our profits, but we have a strong enough balance sheet to be able to deal with it. So that dealt with the financial stability piece. Then the purpose kicks in. And boy, did it kick in big. And having a fantastic team that's uncynical, that knows why we're here, listening to our front line, working very closely, by the way, very collaboratively with our unions. And I'm a big, big believer in unions, in unions that work. They're tough ways to have conversations, but it is a way to deliver. And we just agreed, you know, let's do what we can for the country. We talked to government. I talked to the Taoiseach at the time, to Leo Varadkar, and he said, please do whatever you can just to help us. This is a really tough moment. And so we developed a number of initiatives, whether it be simple things we can do. And Patrick was asking me, what are the lessons of business? What the lessons, and I think people would say it about me, is I love superficial things. You know, I think a lot of people in business spend a lot of time doing heavy lifting, and they forget to do some of the simpler things. So a simple thing for us to do was to give free postcards to everybody at the start of the pandemic, of the lockdown, so people could write to each other. It became a great way for people to socialize. That combination, that ability to bring people together, that doubles down on your purpose to act for the common good, because you're right in the middle of it. Between that, but then actually realizing the most important thing was to make sure that we deliver every day to every house, and then knowing that people were alone, particularly older, more vulnerable people. Classically, postmen and women, particularly in rural areas, would often call in, and the elderly. So we just formalized that and said, well, actually, if you want us to call in, let us know and we will call in. And we set up digital is a big part of our transformation. So you could go online and register your parents and we'd call in. And so initiatives like that are like working with the newspaper industry, and I worked with Liam Kavanagh and the Irish Times and Newsbrand and DMG and a whole load of groups, and said, look, we'll distribute newspapers for free to the elderly. We'll distribute to anybody. You can pay for the others, but we'll distribute for free to the elderly and vulnerable. And that connected people. And these are initiatives that you can do. They don't cost 50 million. They cost 1 million or 2 million. The 50 million is like 10 million for PPE, 20 million for delaying price increases, 20 million for extra staffing around COVID. But the actual initiatives don't cost money. But they don't come from nowhere. They come from knowing why you exist and why you exist as a business. And that's the most important piece. So that really has been it. Now, you know, we're at a point now in COVID where I think we all feel weary. We have, I think, that great French word, ennui. I never know what it means, but I think it means what I'm feeling. And we have that sense of this. But I've said to my team, and I so firmly believe this, I've said, I think 2021 and 2022 are going to be phenomenal years. I think we are going to come out of this so fast when we come out of it. It's going to be the most frustrating period, this first 6 months. So frustrating, particularly because of the delays on vaccination program. And, you know, I think the EU missed the memo about big moves. Yeah. You know, if they'd made big moves early, we'd have the vaccine. But you know, this will be frustrating. But when we get out, the amount of consumers saving there is, the pent-up demand, we could actually be straight into an inflationary cycle, which will create some challenges, but by and large is probably a pretty good thing for the economy. And actually to get into a position where we could see some very rapid growth. So I think it's a brilliant time for anybody in business or anybody about to go into business or investing in business. I think it's an amazing time. There's going to be huge M&A activity. I think there's going to be a huge number of jobs, by the way. People will change jobs. There's pent-up demand where people are saying, yeah, I'm ready to move on. And so all of these things are going to happen. So I think we're going to see an explosion of activity really when we hit the autumn, and better to prepare for that now. So I'm immensely positive about the future. But in the meantime, we've another few months to get through. It'll cost us another few million. But we know what we're doing in Post. We know why we're doing it. And by the way, our revenues are growing, and we are now in a position where we've accelerated our plans, as I said earlier, by about 2 or 3 years. Our parcel volumes, we built our parcel automation for the end of 2023. We're already well beyond that in terms of our volume. So really hard work. We're slightly over trading, but we'll get there. It's a good position to be in.
Great examples. Great examples, David, in terms of the purpose that you know, and getting back to the purpose of Unpost. Great example there, and also great optimism about the future. And what a note to sort of finish our conversation on. Optimism about the future. I must say I'm feeling a bit of ennui myself about the internet connection that I had, but I appreciate Michelle's help and seamless help in that, and your continuity as well, David, in answering the questions. Nonetheless, I think, Michelle, we can move to a question and answer session from our guests, and perhaps you'd like to manage that for me and ask the questions that are coming in.
Well, I see there, I think David has presented such key themes that people have been gripped, and there aren't that many questions. There is a couple around the banking piece, David. This transformation into banking that is I mean, Unpost has obviously always been in the finance side, but there seems to be changes afoot that maybe it's this big change that you're talking about. If you can talk a little bit about that, that might be interesting.
Sure. So, you know, this is our post office business. Post office business, you know, we all remember the post office savings book. And that morphed into the National Treasury Management Agency and government bonds and loans. So all that activity was originally in Unpost, or not in Unpost, in the old P&T, and it moved in and now. But Unpost handles has about 23 billion in savings, which goes into the NTMA, and in state savings and state bonds, and in Unpost savings. So it's always had that kind of bedrock. The issue is, what could we do in terms of banking? And we did a lot of research into our customer base, and we identified our core customer, our kind of bullseye customer, as being female, 35 to 40. We call her Kira. We say she lives in Naas, commutes to Dublin, earns about 45,000 a year. That's our core customer. That's the customer that is most likely to want to be with Unpost. And I remember watching a focus group session we had with that cohort. And it was suggested to the focus group, well, what if Unpost did a mortgage? And the room lit up. And people said, I would love to have my mortgage with Unpost. I'd love to do it. And it was a moment of truth, because what it said is there's a massive trust in Unpost, part of our heritage. But there's also something benign about An Post, which people don't see in the banks. And I'm not making a criticism of the banks. I think actually the banks have had an extraordinary time. And the leadership now in the banks is pretty clear and is coming through. But nonetheless, people had reasons to be pretty upset with banks. And so that's the space for An Post, a benign institution that people can engage with. So that's why our whole model is to be human about money. Literally, we're there. We're in your community. We're not closing branches. And we announced last week that we'll be doing Bank of Ireland agency banking. We do AIB agency banking. So we start to become this really interesting model, which is where we do banking for everybody, but we also have our own products. Now, the products we have, An Post Money, our An Post current account, our An Post credit card. We haven't yet got to the mortgage, but we will get there. These are products that are often white label products, and we take them. And the issue is, how far deep will we get into that? Will we ever get into the production side? In other words, will we get a banking license? Will we be a bank rather than a central bank license? Who knows? We might well get there. At the moment, we're seeing really good growth around those products. We're seeing fantastic engagement from people who want something a bit different. So we're evolving into this, and I don't want to give away all our plans, but I think we're excited by what the potential is.
And sorry, Michelle, if I can just conjoin a couple of questions from Marianne and others. Interested in hearing about how you brought frontline people along the journey and middle management. I'm conjoining those two questions. So how do you bring middle management along and the frontline employees?
Well, it's a really interesting question. Frontline employees is, there's a great story I love telling about. I had an American friend visit me, and from North Carolina, a great guy, and he went down to the Aran Islands, Jay, and he met the postman in the Aran Islands just a couple of years ago, and he said they were chatting over a wall, and lovely sunny day, and he said to the postman, they're chatting. And just as the postman was walking away, my friend Jay said, "Hey, Sean, I didn't tell you I'm staying with in Dublin." And Sean goes, "Oh, who are you staying with?" He goes, "Oh, I'm staying with David McRedmond." Sean's going, David goes, the man who he runs An Post. And Sean said, "No, I run An Post." And I love that because that's the reality. I mean, there could be nuclear war and your post would still be delivered. Postman and postman will always do their rounds. And it's a really strong culture that goes back literally centuries. So, it's not so much how do I bring them along, it's how do I go along with them. And one of the things when I joined was I talked about the union. I actually discovered that, there was a lot of people saying the real problem was the unions. We can't get change practices, we can't deliver on Saturdays, can't do certain things. I have to be honest, the union was more progressive than some management. And the issues were more internal in the business than with the unions. The unions had a very clear plan. They knew what we needed to do. They were desperate to get back into the parcel business that we'd almost got out of. So listening to the unions, you really can learn something. They know they've real skin in the game. They have to, and their members know, because they could, a phrase that was often used, they can literally feel it in the postman's sack. They could feel it was getting lighter as fewer letters were being sent. So I think that was more about us tapping into that energy. As regards middle management, I think that's a really interesting challenge. And I really feel sometimes for people in middle management, it's the hardest place to be in a company, but it's also the toughest place for a company to change. So you've often that notion of the frozen middle, which is a bit unfair on people in middle management. That's actually more criticism at the top because there's something around the communication lines aren't working. So the front line doing great, top team, fantastic transformation there, the brilliant work done to get that on a gender balanced team and diverse team. But then you're having to help people who are actually doing the day-to-day work and making the day-to-day decisions. a key thing I believe in is actually being really clear about only doing the work that only I can do, and the same for my top team. So that is all about not micromanaging, being clear about delegating, being clear about making sure people can get on with their own work. And that's a kind of cultural change we're going through. So I wouldn't say we're there yet. We've a lot of work to do. And so for those people in the middle, if you're ever called the frozen middle, you should just scream and say, well, unfreeze it, you know, let us out. We're capable. There's great capability and great energy. And that's the role of leadership, is to make sure that we get that talent. That's great.
Another question, just the last couple of questions. Another question we have is just speaking to your senior management team and what culture you're trying to create and the key factors for success that you're trying to create around your management team.
So I think I talked about, you know, first of all, the lack of cynicism. That to me is the entry qualification, and that's straightforward. Then what happens? So first of all, and you know, a week after International Women's Day, it's useful to talk about the gender balance. Is that the conversation around the table is much better if you have a balance, if you have a gender balance, if you have a social balance, if you have just good diversity, you get a better conversation. I tend not to do, for example, one-to-ones. I mean, people find it somewhat odd working with me because I think one-to-ones can just breed a bit too much of conversations that don't go elsewhere. So prefer to work as a team. And I think everybody in my team is up for that. Of course, we have some one-to-ones and chat to people, but by and large, we make our decisions as a group. And then I'd say it changes. And this is back to the point I made at the very start about being on the edge of the circle, looking into the outside world. You've got to change the whole time. So our biggest customer and our biggest competitor is the same person, and it's Amazon, you know, and Amazon has an amazing customer obsession. So I think we need to meet that level of customer obsession. And that's literally what we're talking about this week. We just had a conversation yesterday about it. Are we absolutely hitting that customer obsession? So I think it changes over time. Now, I think we'll teach Amazon a few things, by the way, about decent work, respect for our colleagues, respect for people, and they're so focused on the customer that they're driven in that way. I think we can get a good balance. So I think there are some of the qualities we look for and how the culture works.
Final question, and apologies to people. There's a whole stream of questions have come in, but I think this one to end one from Harry. Can you share how you built your own resilience plan? How did you manage your energy level with quite a workload and through an incredible transformation? Your own personal management of.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like one of the great truths is you never stop learning. And here I am talking to one of the great business schools in the world, but you never stop learning. You know, so and actually right at the moment I'm looking for a course to give me a bit of stimulus. I have one, thank you very much. So I'm always on the lookout for that. I think what you learn is that, back to that phrase I used, you can only do what only you can do. And it's not about constant activity and energy and task focus. The biggest challenge, the biggest step change between being an executive and being a CEO, that leadership challenge is all about letting things go. It's all about giving myself time to think and reflect. And the bit of armory that got you to be a brilliant COO, I'm not saying I was a brilliant COO, but I have two brilliant COOs with me. But the things that got them to be there, fantastic energy, great drive, attention to detail, understand things, be rigorous, get things to happen. They're all the things that will kill you as a CEO, you know? And so the big thing I have to build in is reflection time. And I think I've learned some other things. You know, find the support in the team, you know, get good coaching within your team. those are things that you can build in. But I'd say I draw a quadrant where I say the things I look after are the things that are uncertain and important. The important and certain things, right. Budgets, legal things, all of those things, I call them the kind of big boss stuff. They take 2 minutes to do. You know, it's the stuff like brand, strategy, culture. They're the bits that I can influence. All the day-to-day decisions in the company, I can't do as well, close to as well as the people who are making those decisions. So don't get in the way and don't get too involved. So I think there are some of the kind of more personal learnings.
And fantastic to finish on that point, David, because I love two things. I love the point about reflection and taking time to reflect and learn. And naturally, as a business school professor, I love the 2x2 of uncertainty, high-low, and importance, high-low, and thinking about where you can make a difference.
Yeah.
So I really.
Well, look, Patrick, can I thank you, and so grateful to be asked along, and really, really honoured. And you know, I think it's so important the work that you are doing and others who are pulling together your networks and saying, actually, you know what, you may all be at home. I'm at home in a study. You know, you may all be at home on your own, but networking people together so that when we get out of this, which we will certainly get out of, and when the economy picks up again and we have this, what I think is going to be an explosion of activity, we have our networks. Yep. So maybe the final point answer I would say to that question around resilience is I rely on my networks, my friends, my family, my good colleagues to get us through this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, David, for that very gracious comment. And thanks for the insights as well. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Apologies for the technical errors, and thank Michelle for stepping in to help me on those. Your point about networking is vital, David, and we have an opportunity to network ourselves now. Michelle, would you like to introduce the networking session?
So everybody, some of you have been in conversation before on this Remo platform, and we're going to go to a virtual room whereby you will be on a table with another 4 or 5 other people. And if you want to move from one table to another, it is a double click of a chair and off you go. So I'm going to ask my colleague Mario to make this transition, and we will all land in networking.